Thank you so much for the interesting and inspiring article, and thank you, Jeroen, for inviting me to comment. I'm honored. I'll start with a photo of Steinbruvann, where I spent parts of this beautiful summer enjoying the beautiful nature near Grorud while reading The Beautiful Risk of Education. That was a very pleasant combination. Biesta's book and this article provide many important concepts and ideas, and my task is to give my opinion on how these concepts and ideas connect to the situation in teacher education in Norway. First of all, is Biesta's analysis relevant to teacher education in Norway at all? He writes, any attempts to describe everything that teachers should be competent at runs the risk of generating lists that are far too long. Check. There are allegedly 1,100 learning outcomes in the current national guidelines for teacher education in Norway. He goes on, teacher education turns into a tick box exercise focused on establishing whether students have managed to achieve everything on the list. Check. The Department of Education keeps repeating that all learning outcomes should be tested. Arguably, by buying into the learning outcome system, we have, in principle, decided that all learning outcomes should be accessible, or, conversely, that outcomes that are not accessible do not count. Moreover, outcomes that were not predicted in advance also do not count. This also writes about an emphasis on measurement and control. Check. One example, the Department of Education in Norway now wants national exams in, for instance, mathematics in teacher education. Okay, so Biesta's analysis is highly relevant also to Norwegian teacher education. It should be noted, however, that the situation is far worse in many primary and secondary schools than in teacher education. The system of national tests has a huge influence on teacher practices in many localities, and teachers are expected to specify goals for each lesson to be written on the blackboard, and supposedly the pupils should be able to see if they have achieved them. As teachers, most of us have had lessons where a question from a pupil or student lead us in another direction than we had planned. Some of these lessons may have been among the best we have ever had. Will the focus on learning outcomes in individual lessons reduce the tendency of pupils to ask these questions, or the willingness of teachers to follow up on them? Would this seminar have been different if Jorunn had started it by writing an accessible teaching outcome on the blackboard? Moving on to the three domains or dimensions in which education functions, or the three domains of educational purpose, that is, qualification, socialization, and subjectification. First of all, the question of purpose of the Norwegian teacher is a multidimensional question, as Biesta argues. For Norwegians, this can be readily seen by looking at the curriculum documents for primary and secondary education. The very beginning of the introduction to the curriculum says, the aim of education is to furnish children, young people, and adults with the tools they need to face the tasks of life and surmount its challenges together with others. Education shall provide learners with the capability to take charge of themselves and their lives, as well as with the vigor and will to stand by others. There's not just qualification in here. Biesta gives 4 answers to the question of why judgment is needed. As I am a mathematics teacher educator, I will approach this from the point of view of mathematics education, also because school subjects are not mentioned explicitly in the article. Biesta's first answer is about the purpose, and the quotes from the curriculum documents I just gave are of course results of judgments on the national level, which correspond to similar judgments when they are to be interpreted locally. Biesta's second answer is about the form, where Biesta argues that students not only learn from what we say, but also, and often more so, from how we say it and from what we do. For instance, students' view of mathematics, their personal epistemology in mathematics, is well documented in the literature, and we believe that it is mostly based on the teaching they have experienced. Here is a typical example. Mathematics is associated with certainty and with being able to give quickly the correct answer. Doing mathematics corresponds to following rules prescribed by the teacher. Knowing math means being able to recall and use the correct rule when asked by the teacher, and an answer to a mathematical question or problem becomes true when it is approved by the authority of the teacher. The situation is similar in Norway, as some of us have indicated in an article. Breaking with this view of mathematics may not be effective, but it can nonetheless be an important purpose of maths education. The third answer of Biesta is about the balance and trade-offs between the three domains. In the era of testing, finding this balance is more challenging than ever. I would also like to revisit the topic of goals for the lesson. Many of us in maths education are fascinated by Ole Skovsmo's concept of landscape of investigation, wherein pupils may investigate parts of mathematics without even the teacher necessarily knowing what they will find. In other cases, we may want the point of a lesson to come as a surprise insight at the end. A rule that accessible lesson goals should always be written on the blackboard would significantly reduce the teacher's room for professional judgment. Biesta's fourth answer is that the judgments have to be pragmatic in contrast to principled. A teacher or a government cannot decide once and for all which method of teaching is the best to fulfill the purposes of education, but should take the actual students and context into account. This is in contrast to actual politics, when new fads tend to be implemented as one-size-fits-all solutions. I have visited new schools where they are proud that they have built the school to make it impossible to go back to old-fashioned teaching from the blackboard. Some schools or municipalities are even proudly removing the blackboards. Thereby, teachers' room for judgment is removed by design. I'd like to turn for a moment to one particular framework which is extremely popular in maths education at the moment. It is referred to in hundreds of scholarly articles each year. A special issue of the Nordic Mathematics Education journal, NORMAD, was devoted to this framework this fall. I'm talking about Deborah Ball and colleagues' framework for mathematical knowledge for teaching. They list the following domains of mathematical knowledge: subject matter knowledge, common content knowledge, specialized content knowledge, and horizon content knowledge. And on the other side, we have pedagogical content knowledge, which consists of knowledge of content and students, knowledge of content and teaching, knowledge of content and curriculum. Ball's work follows up on Schulman's concept of pedagogical content knowledge, and there is an ongoing effort to develop tests to check whether the students do have this knowledge. There's no time to go into detail on the contents of these domains here. But I'll just observe that the domains of Ball all fall easily into the qualification part of Biesta's three domains of educational purpose. And at times I admit to having become so consumed with this framework that I have forgotten the other domains. But after all, even if a teacher has all the knowledge detailed and tested in this framework, and even if he has gone through socialization, he still needs tekne, practical knowledge, to decide how to do it, and phronesis, practical wisdom, to decide what is to be done. So, how to become educationally wise teachers? Biesta argues that students need to be engaged in the practice of judgment from the very start. Sadly, in research on our students' experiences in practice, where we have interviewed both students and mentors, we see that students are often hindered in developing the teaching they want, as the mentors are afraid that it won't be good enough. sometimes referring to national tests that are approaching. In extreme examples, students are given ready-made lesson plans to perform. Our mentor is not very good. She just gives us a finished lesson plan that we have to follow exactly. So it's as if she has the class, just that we execute the plan. Other students are told very clearly to teach for the upcoming test. But it's not just the mentor's fault, or rather the school's fault. Other unpublished findings suggest that students see the lesson plan as a script to be followed, and do not understand the place of judgment within a lesson. Perhaps this is something the students need to discover by themselves over time. Our data suggests that more third-year students have discovered it. But maybe we also need more often to heed Biesta's advice of studying the virtuosity of experienced educators, to let students get access to virtuosos' judgments. I have looked at the article partly from the point of view of maths education, and I will end my comments with a few questions. Given that schools are, and most likely will remain, organized around the school subjects such as mathematics, science, physical education, what is the relation between school subjects and Biesta's concepts? Is being or becoming educationally wise the same in mathematics as in music? Or is it independent of subject? And how can different school subjects contribute in different ways? Which thoughts or concepts do research on different school subjects offer to this discussion? My comments here could be seen as a minor and preliminary contribution to such a discussion.